Morning.
It
looks like we got everyone here, so we will get started. I want to welcome everyone to our work session this afternoon, or this morning, actually, on the reopening of schools. Let's see, I don't have my agenda here in front of me, so let's Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm assuming that you and Lloyd will push us off and get started.
Yes, sir. So we're meeting today, and we expect that there'll likely be at least one more prior to July 14th. Provide the board an opportunity to see the plans that are underway, the work that's happening, how the district is operationalizing the guidance that's come out from different places as we get ready and responds to the feedback opportunities that we've provided our community. So this is all going to be about reopening schools. We've got a couple of hours dedicated today to this work. We have some time tomorrow if we need to in the work session to extend anything we don't finish today. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lloyd to just go over the desired outcomes for the day.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore, and good morning, Chair Sutton and members of the board. We are certainly glad to have this opportunity to be together this morning for this important topic of reopening schools. We've got a lot of information that we want to cover within the next 2 hours. So without any further delay, we'll go ahead, if you will join me, and look at the slide outlining our desired outcomes for today. By the end of our time together, we hope that we will have opportunity to familiarize yourself with them. They are not ones that we're going to go in detail with unpacking, but we are going to have the opportunity to share some overview of them because they will shape the work that we move forward. Just to let you know, as well as our public know, those documents include from the Department of Health and Human Services, a Strong Schools NC Public Health Toolkit, as well as Lighting Our Way Forward, North Carolina's Guidebook for Reopening Public Schools, which is the more comprehensive report from the Department of Public Instruction. Again, we sent those to you in advance so that you would have the opportunity to comb through them as well. At this time, I'll have our Superintendent Moore just make a few broad comments about these before we engage in a protocol to let you share some of your reaction to these documents that, again, set our baseline for us. Kathy?
Thanks, Lloyd. So the three documents you have, one of them is a summary of the DPI document because the DPI document is quite long. And then, of course, the Health and Human Services, North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services document. And I'll start with the DHHS document from North Carolina. I think one of the most important pages in that document really is page 13, which gives you a reopening K-12 schools decision tree. And within that decision tree, it talks a lot about analyzing the health, the data, the capacity, the different kinds of metrics that will be reviewed as this decision is made. And then I think in that middle box, it says the governor's office, North Carolina DHHS, in consultation with the North Carolina State Board of Education and Department of Public Instruction, determine which plans school districts must follow based on state or regional metrics. So that seems to imply that not the entire state will start necessarily the same way, and that there is still a decision before us in that arena. So I think then again, and then they go into the plan A, B, and C that has been mentioned that I'm sure you've had some time to look at. But I think that, when you think about what decisions are before us, page 13 is really important in the NCDHHS guidance. And then when you move into the Department of Public Instruction guidance, in the long document, the comprehensive report, there's an executive summary that starts on page 3 that talks about the guiding principles for this document, considering the safety and wellness of students and employees first and foremost, responding to the needs of vulnerable and high needs populations, I believe that is staff and students, be adaptable and flexible with the ability to move throughout the academic year from one reopening plan to another based on public health needs, synergize multiple operational and academic factors to develop effective plans, and ensure engagement with all voices represented in the schools. And finally, maintain consistent communication with students, families, and employees to ensure respect and success within the evolving situation. There's a lot that's tied in there, not just what we're looking at, but also this notion of adaptability, of flexibility, moving from one plan to another, perhaps more than once in the school year, how we seek feedback and provide options to families, and then how we communicate throughout all of this. And then when you look through the rest of the document, for each of the areas that are highlighted in the document, student health and needs, employee health and needs, operations, communication, instructional planning, issues of equity and excellence, state, federal guidelines and regulations, each one of those areas is sort of operationalized under plan A, B, and C in terms of what it might look like. Again, it's almost like seeing a flow chart with options within it, depending on what our situation is here in Wake County. There are recommendations and there are requirements in each of the plans. And there is flexibility within the recommendations for a county-specific area to consider whether something that's a recommendation should be a requirement. So those are some of the overarching themes within both of the documents. And I'll turn it back over to Lloyd so he can go on with the rest of the program.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Although we had already started pivoting our attention to the reopening school, we were eagerly awaiting these guidelines. And as I've shared earlier, these guidelines really serve a baseline for us as far as framing and informing some of the work we're doing. We are currently still unpacking them to see their full implication for our work yet to unfold. And so we wanted you to too have that opportunity to unpack them individually, as well as just to have an opportunity to have some dialogue right now. Because we have so much on our agenda, we're going to really move forward in this first part so we can get to the opportunity for you to provide input later. But we do want to exercise a protocol here that's called council, where each person in the group has the opportunity for a minute, minute and a half or less to share their initial thoughts about the topic at hand. And in this case, we're going to ask you to respond to the question that you see on your slide deck there. From the two documents that we just referenced outlining the guidelines, what do you identify as the top implications that we need to consider for our work? You've had the chance to review them. You've had the chance to hear Ms. Moore just make some overarching statements about them. But as a board member, what do you want to call to our attention as implications that we need to consider? I'm going to call your name individually so everybody will have an opportunity to share their initial thoughts or reaction to it. And then after everybody has opportunity to go through this, about a minute and a half to share your respective thoughts, we'll open it up for a brief dialogue among all of the board. So if I could start with you, Chair Sutton, what did you identify as the top implications that we need to consider as you look through the two documents?
I think there's quite a bit. Obviously, probably the biggest around the health and safety of employees. I've heard quite a bit about how we give options to employees and students if they're not feeling safe or if they're not feeling well or what have you, what those options are. So I think that sort of health and safety bucket would be the biggest for me.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Ms. Cash, what implications would you want us to consider based on your review?
Of course, health and safety is primary, looking at social distancing and how we're going to accomplish that if we need to do that. And I think most parents are saying they are worried about that, and especially concerned about the amount of teachers that need to come back to make this work. And what can we do to help them feel good about coming back? And then also, how are we going to be prepared for the mental health of the students that come back?
Thank you, Ms. Cash. That's great. Mr. Fletcher, can you offer to us what your top implications that you identified?
Thank you, Lloyd. Agree completely that the safety of our students and staff is primary in any decision that we make. I think the challenge that we face is having the flexibility to accommodate individual needs and concerns, whether it's establishing a a series of virtual schools with teachers who prefer that assignment and students who prefer that assignment, or some other construct. I think it's important that whatever we do, it's able to withstand the next challenge that we face as a district and a state. So if there is a resurgence in COVID, our system needs to be in place so that we can navigate through that, successfully maintaining quality education and instruction and student engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Mr. Haggerty, may I call on you, please?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Go. There was a lot of information here in the documents, and I think, just for your benefit, I think every one of us is going to say the health and safety of our staff and our students. And so, we'll keep that up there at number one, but to give you something maybe a little bit different, a lot of the recommended actions coming from the state to help ensure safety seem to carry a price tag. And I have concern that some of the recommendations, while they seem very, very wise suggestions, I don't know necessarily how we pay for them. For example, having multiple nurses on every school campus, whether, how we would accommodate the number of bus drivers needed for transportation. So after health and safety, I think I do have some concerns about just how we pull off implementing a lot of these ideas, which I think are good and necessary ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty, and I hope that you will continue to keep those thoughts and share them when we complete our activity at the second half of our meeting this morning. Those ideas will be important to capture. Thank you again. Ms. Johnson-Hostler, would you share, please?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gardner. Thank you, Chris, for saying that. I was just literally thinking, I'm pretty sure all of us are probably going to put health and safety first. And I certainly echo that. So if I had and again, I think Mr. Haggerty's right. I mean, many of us who engage in the legislative process have been talking to those bill sponsors about, is it really true we could possibly have money? So I would be remiss to not acknowledge that money would be a concern for me, but it really is going to be the mental health and wellness, not just actually of our students, but also of our teachers, recognizing whatever decisions we make for them, we're still throwing them back into a situation at this point, without all the tools that they need to manage both the in-classroom or virtual. And for our students, we certainly all know all the mental health issues that come with the loss and grieving that they had of missing a complete almost half of a year. So I would definitely say mental health and wellness would be my 1B next to health and safety.
Thank you, and welcome to you to our meeting today. Ms. Kirshner?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. And I would echo all the comments my colleagues have made. Health and safety for employees, educators, and students has to be foremost. And to that, I was struck, I think we need to be able to check off facilities as a concern. There was detail about water and ventilation systems. So I would hope in the last 2 months we have been going through our buildings to be able to check that off the box as far as our buildings being safe for our students and educators to return to, and also echo the emotional and social mental health needs of our students and educators. I mean, I think Ms. Johnson-Hostler said it best. There's been a lot of grief, and we need to acknowledge that and have folks on hand to address that. And I also is very, just since this is an airborne illness, to think through the logistics, as Mr. Haggerty was also alluding to, and what we do about face coverings and protecting each other while we're social distancing in the building, the logistics of that and the cost of that. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. Ms. Mahaffey? Ms. Mahaffey?
It helps if I hit unmute. Everything that my colleagues have said, for sure, health and safety, including the mental health and safety for our students. We, want them to be safe and feel safe within our buildings. Hearing a lot from parents and about concerns for immunocompromised staff and students, and making sure that we have a platform for those who are unable to or uncomfortable in coming into our building, so that we're able to facilitate learning that way. And then, transportation. Mr. Haggerty said we don't have enough bus drivers currently. We need to make sure that we have folks so that our students who are able to, but maybe don't have a way to get to school, that we're able to get them here. There's a lot of suggestions about having acrylic coverings or dividers for desks. On the last page of the guidance, it talks about making sure every student has 5 cloth face coverings. I mean, if you're in elementary school, 5 is not enough. You always need a couple extras. So again, making sure that we have the things for people to feel safe in the building and to stay safe within the building, and to mitigate the spread as much as we possibly can. And as my other colleagues suggested, that really comes down to funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those thoughts you've shared. Dr. Martin, may I ask you to share?
Yes, thank you. And I too want to, just reaffirm the comments shared by all of my colleagues. As I look through the guidance documents, I sort of see 4 big buckets that I think about. One is particularly related to the health and safety. How do we strike the balance between requirements and respect? There's a lot of things that need to be done on, even something like face masks. We're seeing a lot of debate. Do I have to? Do we make it a requirement? Do we make it a request? And here is where I'm really concerned about, if it's a requirement, then what do you do when the requirement is not met? But how do we teach it in a context of respect? Because a little bit like peanut allergies, I'm not allergic to peanuts, but I'm going to keep peanuts out of the classroom because it may impact somebody else. So, how do we find that respect level for both students and staff? There are real issues and there are perceived issues, but when it comes to something like a virus in your health, many perceived issues are very real. So finding that respect balance, I think, is really important. Others have mentioned the logistics issue. This has to do with dollars. This has to do with personnel. Can we actually do the things that are on the list that need to be done? You can't do it with our current budget. You can't do it with our current number of personnel. In that context, I'm also worried about unintended or secondary consequences. So, for example, the recommended, single-use containers for meals as opposed to things that we wash. That's going to dramatically increase the amount of waste. So, not only are we going to have to deal with the packaging, but we're going to have to deal with the waste. That's again, a logistics issue. That's a cost issue. So there's a lot of those kind of secondary effects that just the logistics we need to think about. I'm very concerned about the impact on teachers and staff. I'm concerned that, we already, take away planning periods to do lunch duty or hall duty or carpool duty. Are we going to require teachers and staff to take care of all this additional paperwork and health monitoring and so on? We can't do that. If teachers have to do the balance of both in class and remote, we're sort of doubling the responsibilities, but we're not doubling the amount of time to accomplish those responsibilities. So I'm very concerned about the impact on teachers and staff. And finally, I'm concerned about the impacts on learning. A lot of what I see, is shifting learning back to what we've tried to get away from. That, I mean, learning is not just, here's a bunch of content to deliver, here's a bunch of assignments to do. Learning is about grappling with information, interacting, in a creative way. So I'm really concerned. One of the teachers on one of the meetings that I was on, noted that we can teach content remotely, but it's really hard to teach skills remotely. How do you teach the thinking? It's not just, hey, did I do the assignment? But did I go to that next level to think about the assignment? Why was the assignment important? That extra stuff is what's so important about education. But so much of what I'm seeing, at least in the initial phases, is very task oriented. So the impact on learning also is something I really hope we can pay significant attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I appreciate all those thoughts you shared. And last, Ms. Scott, would you be willing to share?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gardner. I certainly share the concerns of my colleagues and, especially the priority of health and safety of our students, our teachers and bus drivers and all employees. And as Mr. Haggerty had pointed out, the cleaning that is recommended and the sanitizing, there is a cost with that. We know in a regular year that our teachers, without a pandemic, we know that our teachers are asking for donations of sanitizers and Lysol wipes, and anyone who's been to the grocery store at all over the last few months knows that it's nearly impossible to find those, for your own home, let alone extra that you could donate. So there's a cost to that. I worry about the supply for that as well. And then should we go into a B where we have the plan B with partial students being staggered or coming in for cohorts, that's going to have a big impact on parents and a big impact, and including educators and staff members who are parents, who will be looking after their children if they're in the classroom and their children are at home. And that would be an extra cost. I know I'm not the first person to point that out, but that is almost like a direct pay cut because childcare is expensive and costly. Another concern I have is in any of these plans, what will PE look like? I hope we can still have recess and make sure that students are active. They need to be physically active for their health. And how will that look in terms of athletics, band, chorus, etc. And the last concern I have is how is ADM, how are allotments, 10-day head count, how are any of these going to be considered should we have either a full virtual learning environment or a partial virtual learning environment where we have students who are not necessarily in the classroom at the same time, but are still enrolled in our school. And I believe those were my main concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, and thank you to all of you who shared those very thoughtful comments to us. At the outset of this, after you look at the guidelines, we pretty much anticipated that there may be common themes as far as what you have identified around safety, health, and mental wellness of our students. But even with that, there's so many elements that you unpack tied to any one of those, as you've identified, ranging from funding to implementation to expectations and the like. And a lot of the comments that you shared, you will have opportunity to expand upon those in an activity that we're going to walk you through at the very end of our work session. Part of this protocol, in addition to council allowing everyone to speak and add his or her thoughts, we do open up to dialogue, which now anybody can share comments that might build upon another's comments that were shared, or seek clarity around somebody's comment. But you've done such a wonderful job building upon each other's comments. I'm not so sure we need that much time to engage in dialogue, but I still want to honor the process. So at this time, if anyone heard another comment from another colleague or something that you might want to seek clarity, we'll open it up now for just a few minutes for dialogue. If we don't need this time, we can move on to our next agenda because, like I said, so many of you have already built on each other's ideas and are pretty much getting to unpacking these elements that you'll have a chance to do at the very end. So at this time, I'll offer it that dialogue. If you've heard anything shared by one of your peers that intrigues you or you want to know more about or comment, please do so at this time, and we'll give a few minutes for this. I'm going to try to watch the hand raising in the section, or if you can just comment now, that would be great.
So I see a couple of hands there. We'll start with Mr. Hegarty.
Thank you,
All right,
Chief.
thank you, Mr. Sutton. No, I'm going to try to limit anything I say to under 2 minutes, and I hope everyone else will as well. Bill Fletcher had mentioned an idea that I know I had talked to him about. I don't know if other board members are interested in, but the idea of some sort of virtual program. These have been pioneered by Forsyth County Schools, Cumberland County Schools are looking at these, and I'd be curious as you go forward what you thought about the feasibility of such a program. Through the DPI guidance, the idea of an asynchronous learning model where there's live streaming of classes, if that can be explored. One of the things I worry about is the quality of instruction during remote learning and the consistency of where students are, some who might be in a live setting, some who might be in a remote setting. And it seemed like, at least with that asynchronous, or I'm using the wrong word, just too many documents up here. The one where you're live streaming the classes,
Right.
that one would at least guarantee all students are exposed to the same material. Finally, I do have questions and concerns about how we'll be able to, if we do move to a model like a Model B and selecting which students have remote learning, which students are able to, how we serve the students with special needs that may have special accommodations, and how we balance, remote learning, requests for remote learning with requests for live instruction. All in all the parents who have talked to me, there's a lot of split opinion out there, as you see, from the Thoughtexchange. And I think anything we can do that, if we can, that does allow an option that works for families to protect families that are immunocompromised or at risk, but then allows as much in-person instruction as possible, I think is the best path. Thank you.
Thank you for that additional information.
Ms. Kushner, saw your hand next.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. As Ms. Scott was saying about, Plan B, where we would have A days and B days, and not all students would be in class at all times. I do think we need to think through how we can support childcare and how we can support families. I think that's a very valid concern to lift up. And when Dr. Martin was talking about the collaborative nature of learning, we just built a math curriculum on collaboration. And I believe that, that productive struggle and the work that we're doing is important. But if we've built that foundation, how do we continue that when how have we continued that when we were in remote learning, and how do we continue that for remote learning for those students? And I agree with Mr. Haggerty. Some students and educators are going to prefer a remote platform. So how are we facilitating that math curriculum that we have in the district? And like Mr. Haggerty and others have noted, there are very divergent views amongst our families, so that the more options we can give families, I think the better off we'll be, and when we come together, whenever it is, when there's a vaccine. Thanks.
Thank you for expanding upon those thoughts, Ms. Kirshner.
I think I saw Mrs. Cash after that, and then Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. I just wanted to build upon a couple comments that were made. I do feel like a combination of the two, as everybody kind of feels, a combination of the two, but I would really like to look at the participation rate, as we've already indicated, to see what kids really do have support at home to do online learning. And I think from participation rate, we might be able to see that there are some kids that have a lot of support at home, and therefore the families are probably home with them. However, if we have kids coming to school, I do want to look for our partners for childcare, because I do think if we do a combination, we're going to have to figure this childcare issue out sooner than later. And I would love to move forward on that. Second thing I just wanted to mention is the word I hear in the healthcare area is that I believe that we need to move fairly quickly on contracting healthcare professionals. If we're going to try to use care money or whatever we're going to do to try to get nurses and psychologists or counselors, but mainly nurses. I think there are school systems moving fairly quickly on trying to contract nurses. I would like Wake County, if we have a big need, to move very quickly on that. Thank you. So supply and demand. We just need to be conscious of that right now.
Thank you, Ms. Cash.
Ms. Mahaffey?
You know, Ms. Scott mentioned Plan B, and I think that's the plan that most people are leery of, just because it provides that hybrid and a lot of the unknowns, and wanting to know, again, childcare being a huge piece of what happens to students when they are not, it's not their day to be in school, who is caring for them, because that is an additional cost burden on parents. That if your child's in public school, they're in school. And so the A day, B day, I think a big part of that will be communicating with parents and letting them know what our plans are. I think we saw from the last survey from parents that we can't not over communicate, and letting them know what are the steps, and maybe having our own decision tree of what goes where and how we make the decision. You know, is it school by school? Is it region by region, or is it just the whole district? I really think parent communication and staff communication is a part of that feeling of being safe and feeling like sending their children to our schools it is the right thing to do. The other piece that I heard was the you know, childcare communication and the learning that Dr. Martin talked about. You know, I was excited to see that there is an ed camp coming up. I think giving our teachers the time and the opportunities to work with one another. Should we go into remote learning, or should a teacher decide to be a remote learning teacher during this time? How do we access those higher levels of blooms so that it's not just content, but really making sure that that learning takes hold? Our teachers have did a wonderful job moving into remote learning. We've seen the benefits, we've seen the struggles, and then how do we build on that, and making sure that we're accessing that information from our educators, and also for implementing Plan A, Plan B at the building level, so we know what's best for each school, is really the parts that I find to be making sure we're having that a part of our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I saw Dr. Martin next, and then Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you. To reinforce some of the learning ideas, I want to just reinforce Ms. Scott's comments about things like, you know, phys ed, chorus, band, athletics, because again, I feel like many of these things are the areas where our students actually learn that community aspect, the teamwork aspect, the collaboration aspect of education. These are going to be hard to do. I mean, particularly anything active, whether you're singing or whether you're running around in PE, you're, you know, the more you're projecting, the more you're breathing, the more you're aerosolizing things, which particularly with an aerosol virus becomes problematic. So there are both the challenges, and yet these parts of education, a lot of our clubs are like extracurriculars, are really critical to education. So just want to reinforce that. Also, we didn't quite bring up, but I went back through my notes from some of the teacher discussions I had. I want to highlight that it's really important for us to think beyond the average classroom. You know, when we're doing this mass planning, you know, we think about the 17 students that can fit, you know, in 50 square feet each kind of scenario. But one of the teachers that I met with was a speech pathologist. She said, so So how do people like us work? We usually have a very small office, and we're in very close proximity working one-on-one with the students. And of course, a speech pathologist is worrying about how do you form words, how do you, articulate and engage. So our spec ed settings, our speech pathologists, any of these, special engagements, which are really critical to learning, are going to need particular attention, and they're going to easily fall through the cracks of the average classroom mindset. And then finally, I just want to ask, this, like many formats, are a great setting to get questions on the table. But I guess the question that I have is, when and how do we move past questions to decisions? I think that's going to be really critical. I mean, we're still getting a lot of questions on the table, but at some point, like Ms. Cash noted, we're going to need to make some decisions so that, we can get that healthcare assistant in every school. And if we don't start hiring, we're not going to be able to. So the process of moving beyond from question to decisions, I think, is something I'd really like to see some attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Morton.
Mr. Fletcher.
There we go. Thank you. I think what our community expects and must have is certainty that we're opening school. And whatever that plan is, that we are committed to it and that it will provide the flexibility necessary for families, staff, and global community, global within Wake County community health challenges. I think we all recognize that the remote learning that we implemented on such a fast basis in March and April is inadequate. It was a great start. It was not what we need moving forward into a new semester, and we must change and improve the engagement and the outcome and the effectiveness of that combination of teaching and learning, and when it becomes a primary tool, and we're much better able to be prepared for it. So I'm concerned that I think we need to decide what we're going to do, and I doubt seriously we're going to get the green light from the state to aggregate 162,000 children back in our building. And even if the state does, I doubt seriously that the parents of 162,000 children are going to line up to bring their kids to school. So I think the reality is we're going to have a remote learning strategy in order to maintain our ADM and to maintain our teacher corps. And that clarity and certainty, I think, would be essential to our communication and our commitment to our community. So those are my thoughts. We will open on August 3rd. We will open on August 17th, and this is what we're going to do in order to accomplish it. So that to me is that's the hill we have to climb, is to provide certainty and clarity to our community.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Ms. Johnson-Hosmer.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I'm actually glad I'm going after you. I echo all the sentiments all of my colleagues have made, and I guess one of the things that I wanted to say, along with, again, exclamation point next to everything. But I also want to ask a question, which I'm sure is not what you want in your process, Dr. Gardner. But one of the things that concerns me is basically what Mr. Fletcher just said. We're putting things in place, like talking to our BACs, but as a board, we have a tendency of doing dialogues with you all and then really not knowing what the outcome is going to be until we're at the outcome. And this one just feels significant to me in that this isn't just parents being afraid for their child. I think we're going into so many unknowns for ourselves, for what the future holds, that I think for me, I'm really asking as we go through this dialogue, and I'm sure the folks who are listening and going to go back and watch this also are curious, do we have the ability to do what Mr. Fletcher said? And that is make the hard decisions for Wake County and start to really put pieces in place, like talking to child care facilities and making mental health decisions? Or are we truly going to be tied to what the state decides? And I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but that's really the question I think I'm wrestling with, of having a lot of conversations about what we feel and what we've heard teachers and parents share with us, if we really don't have a way to create the concrete plan that's going to meet what we've all heard. And consistently, I don't think you've heard any of us say anything different. All the things in the document are, aligned with all the things that we've heard from parents. And I would say, to me, the biggest comment I have in this dialogue is how are we going to know, or maybe Mr. Blumberg, maybe it's a question for you, is can we just make those decisions right based on what we know for our families and the things that we'll hear as we're moving forward? But I feel like we're at a timetable that I don't want us to get to August 3rd and say, well, we're still trying to figure this out if you get 5 face coverings or no face coverings, or if we have online or not. I really feel like it's important to stress the fact that it's not just our parents and students, but it's also our educators who deserve to know that we have a timeline and a plan in place, or we at least are working towards a plan. But I'd love to keep talking to y'all about all the things I care about, but I do want to be clear that we have to be stressing publicly all the concerns that Jim has said. All of us have been on calls with our teachers and families, and we really want to make sure that we are moving, this conversation moves us to definitive outcomes.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, and we agree wholeheartedly. All of these factors that you have just identified are the foundation for what you're going to do at the end of this work session, and probably in our continued discussion tomorrow for our work session that's scheduled tomorrow as part of the board meeting day. We know that we have to identify all the factors to make good decisions, and this is exactly what we're doing right now, so that they can be informed decisions and very strategic and good decisions for our community and the students and families we serve, as well as our teachers. We have with us today members of the core team and some members of our work groups that are listening very intently to the information that you are sharing, because not only the input we're getting from all of our stakeholder groups, but the input from you is critical. And so all along for the last several weeks, as we pivoted this attention, we are laying the runway for making these decisions. We feel urgency and we feel pressed to make them, but we also need to know we can make the best ones. And we want to make what's right with our district. Yes, in alignment with guidelines from our state and educational officials, but what is right for our district. So we are considering a lot of different options and weighing them. And as you can imagine, all of these streams of work, which I'll comment to later, interplay with one another. One decision in one area informs another decision in another area, and it keeps right on. So we have to be looking at them as an interplay and how they intersect with one another. And the information you're sharing, the exact information you just shared then, as well as what we'll get from you at the end, is all going to be funneled to those making decisions so that we can make them in a timely fashion and start making them soon and start putting things together. You're going to hear from 2 areas today: transportation, school building occupancy, and some of the things we're having to consider that. And that will pave the runway for our instructional delivery model option. So more of that as we unfold in this work session. I want to thank you again for all those thoughtful comments that were very purposeful, targeted, and very substantive as far as helping us move forward, aligned with the input we've already gathered. And speaking of that input, we have been asking our stakeholder groups, and one of those stakeholder groups involves our parents. And as you know, we've used a platform called Thoughtexchange to get a lot of input from our parents. The Thoughtexchange platform is a very easy system easy to maneuver for anybody who's involved with it. And it allows us to cast a large net over a large group of people to get a volume of input. But even more important with that, it allows the individuals who are participating to rate and prioritize ideas. So we'll begin to see common themes, as well as begin to see what energy lies behind different ideas. Beth Hodge is now going to walk you through the input we gathered through Thoughtexchange. I think you will find it very important. It is also being used to help and shape our decisions and the options that we consider. She's going to move at a rather fast pace so we can get back on time with regard to our agenda, but do know that our discussions will be continued in the work session tomorrow. But I want to draw your attention to this first slide. There was an overarching question that was presented to the parents in the Thoughtexchange, and that is, what are your thoughts, questions, and suggestions to make sure our students and families feel safe and supported as we plan for the new school year? It was open up to any ideas they have, And the beauty of this platform is that parents get to see other ideas generated by other parents and then begin to prioritize them. And we have themes emerge. We had over 25,000 participants in this survey with 33,000 thoughts generated. And of the ratings, we had over 1,140,000 that we received that gave us the top themes in any of these categories. Beth, I'm going to invite you now to walk the board through the findings. I know that you'll do it at a pace that we can get to some of our other topics as well, knowing we're going to give them the link to be able to unpack more detail of this later.
Thank you, Lloyd. Good morning, everyone. I did hear several of you mention the data from the parent survey, so you likely have already seen these. These first few slides will just provide you with an overview of some of the survey questions that we asked. So you can see that this first survey question was to select an option that best describes your involvement, and our parents were overwhelmingly the largest group of participants within this survey. We also asked a couple of questions, one specifically around school district yellow bus transportation. And while this is interesting information, we want to be sure in follow-up questions to the community that we understand exactly who the parents are who may or may not participate. Excuse me. As we, when we see this data, we question whether or not everyone truly understood what it was we were asking here, and whether or not they are people who would actually participate or not participate in yellow bus transportation. We also asked a question around special education services, and this question was designed so that when we are able to filter the data, we can filter it through some of these survey questions that we have, and it'll be helpful for our special education services department to see some of the comments that came specifically from their parents, which they will be able to do. We also asked, is anyone in your household in a high-risk group for COVID? We just felt like this was something that we should know as we consider what we do for our next steps. Then we have a couple of questions that I've pulled some additional views for you. So this question here is about how comfortable do you think you will be sending your child back to school, or going back to school if you were a student who responded. The blue circle that you see is the totality of our respondents. So you can see that 19% are extremely comfortable, all the way to some folks who aren't even certain, or all the way to those who won't send their students back until there's a vaccine. So you can see the total there. And then if you look to the bar graph, you'll be able to see how we have, excuse me, let me get that out of the way. We have broken it down for you by our elementary conversation, middle conversation, and high school conversation. The very low numbers were just the people who participated in the community conversation. And I thought that this would be an interesting slide for you to look at as you consider the community input and who was telling us what. Additionally, I broke down the learning model question into a similar way. So you can see in the blue circle those total numbers that we have, and you can see that 35% want to be back in the school building, and 35% of our respondents were looking at a potential blended school and home model. And then 22% would like a fully online model. Then you can see how that breaks down into the elementary, the middle, and the high school conversations as well. Now, as we get into the themes, these are the major themes that arose throughout the conversation. The bolded or darker color at the top, so the green here is appreciation, and then the words right underneath it in a lighter version of the same color are the sub-themes. So There were themes of communication. That's a big theme. And then there were themes under that of clear, timely, transparent communication and just general communication. And this would be communication from parents to, or from schools to parents and from community to parents. There were also themes, a big major theme of learning and instruction and the sub themes underneath it, as well as planning and decision making, stop and reduce spreading and exposure, and support, with those additional sub themes. I provided it to you this way because I don't yet have a better way of breaking it down and giving that to you in a report. So I wanted you to be able to see that within each of these major themes, there were very specific categories of information that people were speaking to us about. Now, the next couple of slides are just some high-level overviews of how they look at how those themes break down at each level. So at the elementary school, the largest theme was around stopping and reducing spreading and exposure, as you all mentioned at the beginning of our conversations this morning. And then the next largest theme was learning and instruction, followed by some of these other themes. The little bitty box that you can't really see at the bottom is just called other. And that was a category of some random questions. It was nice to see that appreciation was a theme that fell out in all of the areas. And that was appreciation for staff and for the district for the work that we've been doing over the last couple of months. Middle school kind of flips just a little bit from elementary school, where learning and instruction rated higher than stopping and reducing spreading and exposure. There were more conversations about the learning and instruction than there were about the stopping and reducing spreading and exposure, support, and all of that. We see a similar breakdown at the high school level, with even more attention paid to learning and instruction than some of the other categories were. So very fast, I know, very high level overview. You will, after this presentation, get a link to all of the comments that you'll be able to sort and filter in a variety of ways as you prefer to look at your data, and you'll be able to read through as many of the comments as you would like to do. So Lloyd, I'm going to turn it over to you as we engage our board members in this discussion.
Because we want to be responsive to our parents and students' needs as well as our teachers, this information is incredibly important. And you can see how we could use it as we start looking at different instructional delivery models that we would consider for options for our district. We're going to cross-reference this data point set with the input we've gathered from our principals, from our teachers with our district surveys, as well as our teachers from our NCA focus groups. We're also surveying our school-based staff, and we probably will survey a number of our operational staff like bus drivers and others as well that support our daily work. Because we want to make sure we have enough time for our activity, group activity at the end, I am going to still ask this question, but if you have some pressing reaction or comments you want to provide to this overview that we've given, please do so. If not, we'll go ahead and transition to our next topic. Much of what you have shared is validated, and a lot of this input that we have, which is good, because we can see the connection of themes among all of our stakeholder groups, as well as any disconnects that will be important to recognize as well. Does any board member have any responses or feedback you want to give to any of the top emerging themes that might be different from what has already been shared?
Dr. Gardner, I've got a couple of hands. I saw Ms. Kushner's hand first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. And it's not really a paradox or as much of a tension that I noticed the elementary responses really were emphasizing being back in the building, but then they had the greatest health and safety concerns. The middle school parents seem more open to blended learning, and they're really focused on teaching and learning. So we need to balance those tensions.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Kushner. Ms. Mahaffey, I also saw your hand.
Yeah, related to what Ms. Kushner said, with the difference in the top theme being health and safety, or stopping and reducing the spread of exposure at elementary, and then seeing learning and instruction being end top for middle and high school, and speaking with middle and high school parents, just anecdotally, hearing a consistent theme of, because there are multiple teachers that those students are seeing, there were many different platforms that each teacher required the students to access. And so hearing from parents that hoping that as we have to go back into blended learning or remote learning, having a building consistency of how students access their work, because sometimes, you know, one teacher would require this platform, another teacher would require another platform. And so just having a little more consistency to reduce that initial stress of how do we navigate all of this, especially if you're on like an 8A B day where you have 7 classes that you have to work through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Hegarty.
Thank you. And real quickly, I just want to thank Ms. Mahaffey for her comments, because those are consistent with a lot of the feedback I've been getting from parents as well. I just have a really quick question, which goes back to the numbers presented about bus ridership and the responses about whether or not families intended to use the yellow bus. Context for that, can you tell me how those numbers match up with our current bus utilization in terms of parents that use the option now? Is this a decrease? Is this about the same ratio? What does it look like?
Mr. Haggard, Bob Snidemill is going to present in just a few minutes. Can he incorporate that in his comments?
Absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Snidemill, if you will give thought to that so that you can incorporate in your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hegarty. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. This feedback is excellent. It's very much in line with what I've been hearing. The one thing that I note that I think is really important takeaway is 31% of our population, as evaluated, has someone in their household that is in a high-risk group. And so while that's about the same percentage of people who said, I have no concern about going back to school, that just really highlights that requirement of respect that I highlighted earlier, because even though I might not have a concern going back into the building, if a third of the people that we're interacting with have someone that's high risk in their household, that means all the rest of us have an obligation to provide a safe setting for those other folks. So I just wanted to really highlight that numbers. My question I have has to do with the survey population, and I think the responses were incredible. I was glad to see that about 12% said that they had some kind of special ed needs, and that pretty well balances. My recollection is we have about 12.5% of spec ed students in the district. So that means that the survey captured a representative group. My concern is that in one of the previous discussions, I think it was on the order of 10% of our families, at least from our school response, had difficulty accessing internet devices, what have you. And so my question is, how was that sector of our population contacted to get information? Because my sense is that that's where a lot of high needs are going to be, in sectors of the population who don't have ready access to be able to fill out a survey like this. So how will we get information from people who can't readily do an online survey?
Dr. Martin, that's a very good question, and one that the core team has wrestled with as we've looked at this data. We are trying to leverage several student groups, whether it be the Superintendent Student Leadership Council, but also our Helping Hands group, as well as some other groups that our Student Support Services work with, as well as our Office of Equity work with, both parent groups as well as student groups. We're also reaching out to some parents at schools that might have certain populations, especially significant numbers in populations where we didn't have the connection as we wanted to try to see if we can reach them as well through this avenue of a direct personal contact to get some more input. So we are trying to put in some things in place to get some other subgroups input from them that we might not have generated in this respect through those avenues.
Thank you.
Dr. Gardner, didn't see it in my hands. I wanted to make just a couple of brief comments regarding blended learning, online, virtual learning. Sort of going back to also the previous session. One, I wanted to just kind of tack on to Mr. Fletcher's comments. I was thinking the same thing in terms of our expectations, I guess, as a district of what, or the quality around virtual learning, digital learning. Obviously, in this crisis that we dealt with, and Superintendent Moore often preface her comments with asking the community to extend to us the abundant grace and patience. And so to Mr. Fletcher's point, I think much of our community, parents and the district did that. But as we look at online learning going forward, raising our expectation in terms of the quality of that there will be an expectation that is much higher than I think what we saw in the last few months from March to the end of the year. And so I don't know if it's worth it at some point. So just having a conversation or talking about what do we expect that learning to look like in terms of quality. And then the second question in terms of implications, we've had now a blended learning model in Crossroads Flex now for, I guess, a couple of years at this point. What do we know? What can we learn as a district in terms of implications from what we've had, the success we've had at Crossroads Flex, and how much of that can be scaled up from one school to a district level in terms of our approach and work with blended learning? You don't have to answer that now, but just thinking in terms of implications and going forward, what do we know? What can we use? What have we learned from the Crossroads Flex model that could be scaled up into this work that we're doing now around the pandemic?
So I will not get into a lot of detail, but I will make a general statement in response on Mr. Sutton. And knowing that there is likely going to be some blended with remote learning as we go into the new year, the academics team, along with all the departments under our academic advancement team, are already looking at how the remote learning, the virtual learning has got to be elevated to another level where it will be inclusive of our special ed, our AIG, our ESL, our interventions. They recognize that it will be in a different approach, often with a different focus and format than some of the work that we've previously had over the last several weeks. And they're working hard to take that to that next level with regard to online learning. In addition, there are conversations that the Academic Advancement Office is having with Crossroads Flex and SCORE with regard to taking many of the platforms and many of the strategies and practices they have and seeing how we can break it at a larger scale with regard to expanding that work in a virtual setting. So more of that is going to be unfolded for you and the board as some of that work is attended to as far as putting the factors, but those conversations are going on with the core team as well as the work groups that are branching off.
Okay. I got two more hands that are up. Dr. Gardner, do you have time? I know you want to move on. Do you have time for two quick comments?
We certainly will take them, yes.
Okay. Mrs. Scott and then Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I was curious, Dr. Gardner, if you had the data to share. Were the surveys, did parents have the opportunity to complete the surveys in a language other than English? Thoughtexchange.
Yes, they did. They could choose the language that they needed to complete it. and I can get those numbers for you. In fact, I think that they're on the link that I'll be sending to you later after our meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
And the other question I have is I know that staff, I'm not sure if it's just teachers or which staff members, that employees, Wake County public school system employees have also been issued an employee specific survey. But I do feel that that's important too, because educators and people who work in the buildings are also processing the big plans that have been the guidance at the same time. And I do think that feedback is absolutely valuable to consider as we move forward with creating our own district plan. So I'm not sure when those surveys are expected to be. I'm not sure when those are expected to be turned in or completed. The staff surveys.
So, Ms. Scott, we are surveying almost every position in a school-based setting to get those voices. And those surveys, if they're probably scheduled to go out this very week.
Okay, to be returned. I think they went out at the end of last week. Do you know when that
Oh, I'm
data
sorry,
will be?
I misunderstood your question. I apologize.
Sure.
I think the return rate is at the end of this week or the beginning of next.
Okay. And I'm sure I asked the question strangely, so that's on me.
It's me. I'm sorry. No, we're trying to get every voice possible that we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And we've also extended an invitation to Kristen Beller at NCA to work with her and the input that she's doing so that we can share our input with her and she likewise share it with us so we can cross-reference. Okay. Are there any other questions, Mr. Sutton?
I have one more from Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And I wanted to underscore Chair Sutton's point about remote learning. We have to remember that the remote learning that started in March was already built on the relationship that our students had with their teachers in the school year. And here in when we start back up in August, it's going to be a fresh start. So we have to keep that in mind. And I think Dr. Martin also had his hand up, Mr. Sutton, but that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dr. Martin, do you have another question or comment?
I did, but I just typed my comment in the chat. Just a quick note that blended learning in the era of COVID is very different than the traditional blended learning. Traditional blended learning, the purpose is to have students independently prepare so that when they come together, there can be that intense engagement and collaboration. So the blended learning in the time of COVID is very different because you can't have that come together and have the intimate collaboration. So just two different worlds.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. And our Chief Technology Officer, Marlo Gaddis, would be very excited and proud to hear you say that. We are trying to transition to that culture that is needed for the online learning versus what we had to stand up quickly, kind of an emergency setting over the last weeks when we had to abruptly close school. Mr. Sutton, are we good to go forward?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So some of this input that we just shared with you from our parents, and it is quite incredible that we have over 1 million ratings from the parents who participated. That serves as a strong baseline with regard to our ability to be responsive to our parents and to take into consideration their input. And part of this input will be part of your opportunity to share and unpack even further with your respective board advisory councils this week and next week. We know that you as a board had an interest in seeking input from the larger community, primarily parents in your respective regions, but also community members at large. And you've chosen the board advisory councils as a structure to do that very thing. We offered assistance to you in trying to provide a protocol that you could use so that it would be a consistent process for collecting that input. I want to thank our area superintendents and Jackie Ellis, Chief of Schools, as well as Marlo Gaddis and her team for helping with regard to the facilitation of these meetings, as well as technology support that's going to be offered to you for the virtual meetings. At this time, I invite Cedric Williams, the Northwestern Area Superintendent, and Leanne Alford Key, Special Assistant to the North Area Superintendent, who are going to briefly and quickly walk you through the proposed agenda and the protocol that you may choose to use for your board advisory meeting. Later today, you will be receiving a link to all of this material so that you can share it with your back chair, as well as a secretary, or however you might want to distribute this accordingly. So, Mr. Williams, I will turn it to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. Good afternoon, board members and everyone represented. We are here today to talk about the Board Advisory Council meetings that will start this week. We've created a protocol that we will hope to follow throughout each particular session. By this time, every board member should have heard from a representative from the area superintendent group in regards to next steps as we prepare for the board advisory meetings. Leanne is with us this afternoon as well. In just a moment, she's going to take steps to go through the actual item to make sure that everybody is on the same page and in the know as far as what the protocol entails. So Leanne, are you ready?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So you will see our desired outcomes for the protocol are listed there. We want to make sure that we have designed and structured this protocol to maximize the amount of voice that can be given to the participants who come to the Board Advisory Council meeting. And specifically, we have designed these questions so that they will build on the input that you just saw from that Thoughtexchange data, as well as our initial survey on remote learning that was presented a couple weeks ago. We will be walking through the protocol by beginning to share some of that data so that everyone who is present has a grounding in the data that we base our questions off of. And then we will proceed with a discussion with each of 4 discussion questions. If you could scroll down a little bit and show the process. So in the process here, you see that the board member will begin by posing the questions, and participants will initially answer with their thoughts in the chat. The design behind this is so that we can hear from as many people as possible. And then our area superintendent and our technology services division staff member will be moderating the chat and suggesting people to follow up on discussion with so that we can hear more. So if someone shares something in the chat that we need to hear more about, we can ask some follow-up questions, or we can call on people who are able to provide more voice to those questions. We'll repeat this same process for 4 questions. If you'll scroll down and show those, please. Thank you very much. First, asking the participants to give some input on how we reconcile the continuum of thoughts in that data that you all were just discussing. What is the most important factor for our participants in this session that we consider in reopening schools, and what they would want to see in some type of blended homeschool model of instruction, and finally, what types of communications they may be seeking as we're looking to reopen the school year. And then the session will close with 15 to 30 minutes of dialogue that the board member facilitates based on whatever you want to share in the closing. So we'll take some initial questions if you have them about the protocol. We also know that you can be working with your area superintendent designee to set things up specifically for your board advisory council.
So I just want to chime in as you are thinking or processing. Allowing the participants to put their question into the chat. As area superintendents are looking at those chat questions, one thing that we will keep in mind is as we are calling on individuals to expand on their question or to just try to make sure that there's understanding in their question and their thought, we will make sure that we try to diversify the individuals that we call on to try to make sure that we are creating that equity of voice in the room, if you will, and just calling a variety of people. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind as well. Any board members have any questions or anything that they want to chime in with at this point?
Yes, Ms. Mahaffey has a question.
I'm just, because these are large gatherings, I'm curious, is the platform that we're using and are we able to, I believe it's Google Meet that we're running this through? Okay. And just making sure, hopefully our parents were able to access Google Meet with our students. Is there any sort of like general tutorials on how to access it that we could send out to maybe people who aren't familiar with it, so that they're not, I don't want to assume that everybody knows how to do it, and just make sure that folks understand the protocols as we go in, so we can have our meeting smoothly as we move through that short amount of time that we have.
Absolutely. Those resources do exist, and we can be sure that we send them to you. Go ahead, Marlo.
Yeah, you're fine. Ms. Mahaffey, we have that document on how to join a Google Meet, and we'll be glad to do that.
That would be great.
Yeah, we'll be glad to add that so that when you're sending out your invitations, that you can also send that document at the same time.
And you don't have to have access like via a Gmail account to access Google Meet.
No.
So
no, one of the reasons why we're using Google is because it doesn't require a download. It works on any type of device, even a cell phone, a smartphone it'll work on. The only limitation we have is it'll hold up to 250 people.
So yeah, I think Ms. Maffey's point is.
And then we have a lot of interest. I was just going to say, we have a lot of interest in this topic. And so I imagine there will be folks who are not regular BAC members wanting to attend, just making sure, not in case there is a max out in one of our groups, that there's a way that these questions can get accessed and answered by families afterwards that we can send out at the end of the meeting.
Absolutely.
And I just want to agree that sending out a how-to is a good idea, and it needs to be how-to more than just how to connect to the meeting, because how to access the chat window, how to access the Partridge Family view versus just the speaker view, whatever anybody's comfortable with. Just a little nuts and bolts how-to, I think, would be very beneficial to be able to send out.
We'll be happy. Thank you, Dr. Martin.
And even if we have, if someone I appreciate the fact that someone from your team, Marlo, is going to be available during that. If even they want to take 2 minutes to just show the features in case folks haven't reviewed the document, I think the more we have just familiarity with that would help people feel like they can access it more easily. Even if it is, for some of us, the 30th time we're hearing it, I don't think it hurts to say it again.
We do that on almost all of our meetings that we have, even internally to the district. So I'll make sure that that's part of our protocol that we follow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Mahaffey. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. I was also curious about the opportunity. What sort of translation opportunities are possible in this type of setting? I don't know if that's a feature within Google Meet, or if there's some. I know that there is the opportunity to have closed captioning added, but I was just also thinking about access for people who do not speak English.
Itself, I don't believe has a translation option. You are correct. They do have closed captioning, but I will verify, and we can also speak with Tom Huffstetler and his team to see if there may be some options there as well.
Ms. Scott, we are in the process of researching that. We sent communication to Mr. Simmons and Tom Huffstetler over the weekend so they could see what other options we might have. I don't have anything to share with you right now, but it is being explored.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Sutton, are we good to go forward?
I'm sorry, a couple of other questions. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I do have a question again about capacity. I agree with Ms. Mahaffey that this may exceed kind of, at least for me, my normal BAC. So so I guess my question is, if we have, I don't know, 150 people, do you all have already in the protocol how we're going to manage that number if it exceeds the 60 mark, which is what 40 to 60 is probably, I would say, kind of a rough estimate of expectation, but if it exceeds that, do you all have a plan? Like, would we use breakout rooms or some other way so that it doesn't feel overwhelming for people who don't often have to do video conferences?
I believe, although Mr. Williams or Ms. Alfred Keith may want to jump in here, we actually have our principal meetings the same way with 200 plus folks. That's one of the reasons why we're using our chat window for folks to type in their questions. We're able to answer those and as well as pull those out so that if we see a question that needs to be asked, then we will call out to the person who's asking it and ask them to speak, unmute, and have that conversation there. We currently don't have the capacity to do breakout rooms in Google Meet. So that's currently the process that we're planning on.
I can also add that we created the RSVP form that you all are using so that we could know and plan in advance how large they will be. We know we may have a few attendees who don't RSVP, but that should give us a general estimate.
Oh, I wish I could agree. I think that's possible, but my fingers are crossed that it'll be different this time. RSVPs usually don't work well for at least my BACs, but hopefully it will this time, because I do think it'll be much better for you all to have a sense of the number of people in a video call.
And what I would say is that certain areas have already sent out their RSVP and they've started RSVPing. And we can definitely take a gauge of that over the next couple of days to see how it's going and try to figure out a plan B if we need one to make sure we accommodate those that may not get into this particular session, but hopefully we will be able to serve everyone. So we'll definitely keep you posted as far as what your numbers look like for each particular session.
I think we're just a little nervous after the calendar meeting when WebEx met its limit, and we want to make sure that that's not something that we're setting ourselves up for again. And I appreciate you all being adaptive and now live streaming things on YouTube and having that capability. So just making sure we can get everybody access to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Cash, I saw your hand and then it came down. Did your question get answered?
Just a quick question. So, well, first of all, I'd like to say if we meet our maximum, I'd like to have all my back meetings this way. But also, we might have a possibility to actually go back and have a second one of these back meetings if we need to, if there's a lot of input we didn't get to.
That is possible.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Fletcher, you also had your hand raised, I think, and I saw it come down. Was your question answered?
I think an underlying principle here is that the staff wants all of the BACs to ask the same questions. I don't know that limits us, but that's how we get the uniform. The feedback is following the protocol of asking those 4 questions. So it's just a comment.
Okay, thanks, sir. Okay, I see no more questions, Mr. Williams, so you may proceed unless you're finished at this point.
Chair Sutton, that concludes our part of the presentation. I will turn it back over to Dr. Gardner.
Okay.
Thank you, Cedric and Leanne. We appreciate that, and we look forward to the input you're going to receive in your back meetings. We know that there's a challenge in operating in this type of environment, but it's the closest environment we can try to set up for you in order for you to do what you wish, and that is to hear from your community members in your respective regions. So we're very optimistic and hopeful that it's going to serve that purpose for you and it's going to go well. But between now and then, if you're back meeting, we stand readily available to help you with any of the protocols or any of the procedures if you have questions as you give thought to it. So thank you. In our last time together, we shared with you all the different multiple streams of work that we had identified that are going to be crucial to the scope of planning for reopening. And at that time, I also emphasized how those multiple streams of work have layers upon layers upon layers with them, and with each decision informing another. And today, two examples of this to illustrate the interplay is that of transportation and facilities. And both of these set the runway for the instructional models that we can have, especially within the guidelines. We just wanted to familiarize you with the work that is going on with the core team in these work groups. It is going to be at a high level, but we want to share with you some of the information that we are trying to compile and use in making decisions about the instructional models, many of which you have already commented about today in some of your opening remarks. Bob Sneidemiller is joining us from the Transportation Office, and Elizabeth Sharp is joining us from the Facilities and Design Construction Department. They are going to move at a rather fast pace so that we can make sure at least we start our activity with you for input, even if we have to continue it for homework tonight or in the work session tomorrow. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you at this time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gardner, and I will try to move through this material as quickly as I can. So hello, everyone. I think we all know that the overarching question in the district is how we will reopen. And obviously there are transportation implications and concerns and thoughts around that also. We need to know, will there be social distancing requirements? That's a big if. And how will that impact the bus capacities and the capacities on our special needs cabs? So we'll need to know how many students are going to be riding a bus or a cab on any given day to school. We all know we have our regular board approved bell schedules. Will we be able to adhere to those bell schedules depending on the number of trips and the load on each bus or each vehicle each day? Will there be a tolerance for some type of staggered arrival and departure times at schools if we have to make multiple trips for each planned bus run? And another big question is how many bus drivers and safety assistants will return and feel safe to return so that we can implement the plan chosen. And at the bottom of that slide, there are just some other questions that we've been considering in transportation. I'll let you read those on your own. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Considerations, and these are pretty common across all districts for transportation folks that I've talked with. We know that right now with 6 feet of required social distancing on a school bus, we might be able to fit up to 11 people, including students and any staff that need to ride. And that's on a 72 passenger bus. So obviously this could impact school schedules. We think it would be ideal to do a parent survey and understand exactly who's going to ride a bus, and to maybe address Mr. Haggerty's question here. Beth did mention that maybe we need to restructure or clarify the question to parents in the survey as to who will ride a bus. What we know is that a large majority of our students are eligible to ride a bus, but 44% actually use the bus and are assigned to a bus. And so with the 44%, it would be ideal to know of that 44% or our 70,000 riders exactly who intends to utilize the bus. So Mr. Haggerty, I hope that answers your question. If not, we can certainly come back to that. Again, we need to understand how many staff will return, primarily bus drivers and safety assistants. And that's on top of going into the year where we left off, and that was short the number of bus drivers we needed for the number of planned routes we had at that time. And another huge consideration in regards to transporting students is with the health screening requirements. If they're going to be required as students get on a bus in the morning, then will we need an extra adult or extra staff on the bus to help accommodate that? So next slide, please. So for the 2021 school year opening, we are planning our base plan, what we call our base plan, and that's a plan to open schools as usual, that there would be no social distancing, things just look normal. We believe this will allow us to spin adjusted plans due to social distancing from the base plan, but that'll give us a platform to work from. And this also allows us to convert to business as usual once all restrictions are lifted. A bit of good news is that we're only opening one elementary school this year, so there were not a lot of expected changes in our routing from last year to the new school year. So I think that'll help us overall. So in looking at some plan adjustments to with social distancing required, we know that 6 feet of social distancing, as I've said before, will allow 11 students per bus. If we could reduce the social distancing requirement to 4 feet, we believe we could get 22 students on a bus at one time. The important thing here, I think, to recognize is that 11 riders is basically between 20 and 25% of our average assigned riders to each bus or run right now. So we are reducing the capacity or reducing the number of riders that we can allow that are assigned to each run very significantly. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we may need to make more than one trip, possibly two, possibly three, depending on how many students we can put on a bus at one time? And that's 2 or 3 trips per regularly scheduled runs. And so again, that begs the question: will we be able to transport students according to the board approved bell schedules, or will there be an impact on arrival and departure times? Next slide, please. So this slide simply shows you or illustrates the number of students we can fit on a bus with the 2 levels of social distancing, the 6 foot and the 4 foot. It just gives you an idea of what that might look like. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides, we built a couple of charts to show a mathematical analysis of our routing data. And again, this is just straight math. In addition to this, we're running actual models in the routing system just to see how they match our mathematical outcomes. Next slide, please. So this assumption is that we would transport 50% of our riders to school each day, with 50% of students attending school on any given day. The left-hand column in the chart where it says base plan, that is our 2019-2020 data, where we use 750 buses, 750 routes to transport 70,000 students. And those buses made 2,047 runs in the morning every day. So if we look at adjusting that plan to allow for only 11 students on a bus at one time, of course, our plan is to use 750 buses in hopes that all of our drivers will return. And we found that limiting the bus to 11 students, that we would have to make 1.96, or on average, 2 trips for every scheduled bus run, meaning basically the bus would need to come in with 11 students and go back out and get the remainder of the students to get everybody assigned to that bus run to school. So as you can imagine, we think we would need to expand the time between our tiers And then we would also need to build time in for health screening and all of that. And so the right-hand column is basically adjusting the base plan to allow for 22 students on a bus at any given time. And you can see really the significant number there is the average number of trips per scheduled run, and it's at 0.98. So anything less than 1 trip per run is pretty much business as usual. Again, our only concern for getting students to school with 22 on a bus at one time would be the health screenings and the time that would take to screen every student as they get on the bus. Next slide, please. So this is basically modeling the same information with the assumption that 20% of students would attend school each day and 20% of our riders would be riding each day. Again, the left-hand column is the same you saw on the prior slide, utilizing our 750 buses. With this plan, to adjust to 11 capacity on a bus, you can see that the average number of trips per run drops below 1 again, and it's 0.78. So we feel pretty comfortable that we could transport 20% of our students to school every day with a limit of 11 students on a bus. But again, we have to consider what time it will take for the health screenings and how that might impact the arrival. And so naturally, if we can stay under 1 run per or 1 trip per run with 11 students on a bus, if we increase that to 22 on a bus at one time to get 20% of our population to school each day, then obviously that seems to work very well. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, 50% attendance at a school any given day with 11 students on a bus would likely impact bell schedules and arrival and departure times. 50% attendance with limited capacity of 22 on a bus would not have a significant impact on the arrival and departure times, but it could have some, again, around the health screenings that we may need to do as students get on the bus. And things that we do need to consider, and I've talked about this, that the model does not allow for the time to health screen. So we do need to figure that out and what that impact would be. And it also assumes that all of our bus drivers and safety assistants will return. As we looked at our special ed model and our contract trans, social distancing will have the same types of impacts there, obviously. On a 7-passenger minivan, which is what we run and contract for most of our vehicles, I would imagine that may be 1 student allowed on the vehicle at any given time. And so we are looking at, with the core group, looking at what that means to special ed transportation and contract transportation. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snide-Miller. I have a couple of questions for you and hands. So, Mr. Snide-Miller, Dr. Gardner, if you'll allow me. Got a question from Ms. Kushner. How will changes to transportation affect our allotments from the state and impact efficiency rates? And Mr. Fletcher asked a similar question. How does reduced ridership affect state funding for transportation? So both around these changes and how does it affect allotments and funding from the state?
Yes, sir. Excellent question. Just briefly, I mean, we've gotten a commitment from DPI Transportation. They understand, what ridership will potentially look like. So they've made a commitment to fund the transportation department at the same level, or at least the same level as they did in the 2019-20 school year. So from a funding perspective, we should be fairly solid.
Okay. Thank you for that response. Also, Mr. Fletcher had a question. What is social distancing requirements when students wear masks? Or is there a social distancing requirement, I guess, when students wear masks?
The 6 foot is an unmasked person. So if everyone's wearing a mask, what is the social distancing expectation?
So we know that under the guidelines, it specifically says that if we open under Plan B, that we ensure sufficient social distancing with at least 6 feet between people at all times in school facilities and on school transportation vehicles. So my assumption there is that mask or no mask, the requirement is 6 feet. And we can certainly look to see if there are some relief in that requirement if we have masks on students.
And this is Jonathan. Bob's interpretation is consistent with my reading as well, but likewise, if we could look to see if we can get some possible flexibility before any sort of final judgments are made on it. But that was my same interpretation.
Mr. Steinmiller, Mr. Haggard had a question. On page 21 of the NCDPI document, there's a guidance on positive screening protocols. His question was, do you think, or do we think the guidance for screening students before they get on the bus, do we think that is achievable?
Well, I think with the right resources on the bus, it's achievable. I do know that there's another option, and that parents can sign an attestation. And I believe it's a one-time signing of a form saying that they will not put their student on a bus should they be symptomatic. And then the students would be transported to school and not screened while getting on the bus, and then screened when they get to school. So I think as a district, we have to make that determination on where these bus riders will be screened. But I do think we have a couple of options there.
And Bob, if I could extend that just a little bit further, our health guidelines subgroup is working on that very thing right now about the point of making that screening, whether it is the form they just fill out by the parents and do the more intensive temperature check-in screening at the school site. And that's more efficient and even better because we have more personnel to do it there. But that's all being weighed as far as in the context of what Bob has presented with number of routes and number of students on the buses.
All right, and then I got hands from Ms. Mahaffey and Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Mahaffey, floor is yours.
So I had a few, and so I started writing them down. And obviously, Mr. Steinmiller, I don't expect you to have all the answers, but certainly things that I'm sure you and your group have thought of. If students come from the same family, are they able to share the same seat, seeing as they're in the same household? And then moving more to the human capital side, how many drivers are needed to run these routes with the base plan, given the extra strains on the system? I know we've been at a shortage of bus drivers for as long as I've been on the board. So how do we get that piece? And is there a marketing push for more drivers? I'm out of mother-in-laws, so I can't offer any more up. And do we need additional buses from the state, or do we have the infrastructure to manage this?
Yeah, all really good questions.
But I'll stop there for in case you have any answers, and then I can continue.
Well, I'll share with you, our thoughts. I don't know that we have solid and concrete answers on all of that, other than I do know that we have the equipment. We have the number of buses, and we can acquire more. And I won't go into how we do that, but we have that available to us. Right. And again, we are building next year's routing plan on the 750 bus drivers. We ended the year with around 710. When we closed schools, we had around 710 bus drivers. We've had challenges in holding classrooms for training and bringing on new bus drivers, as you can imagine. We're working on a virtual option that hopefully we can get moving on fairly soon with DMV so that we can start filling that pipeline again. So we are actively working on trying to grow bus drivers, but right now the plan is to utilize no more than 750 buses or routes in whatever plan we develop, and hope that we have our 710 bus drivers return and that we still have our 60 what we call full-time permanent subs that have their CDL that also fill in and are assigned routes. So I'm not going to say that we aren't concerned about, you know, some of our bus drivers not feeling comfortable returning. So that could have impact.
And then if we look at, you know, plan B, where we have the limited capacity, you know, my concern is if we still have families that are in need of childcare for their students, but maybe not have access to it. I don't know if that's something we're able to work with different childcare providers so that their kids can be in safe hands if they aren't able to access childcare through their own means of transportation. But again, that plan B piece, no matter what that looks like, is concerning for me just because of the additional limitations that it does give. You know, there's only so many seats on a bus and so many bus drivers that we are able to have. So those are my questions and my thoughts. And then obviously cleaning and making sure, you know, the additional time for cleaning the buses, who's in charge of that and how much additional time is that going to take in our system? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mr. Fletcher, did you have any additional questions?
I do, and I'm just, Mr. Schneidmiller, I appreciate the fact that DPI is going to hold us harmless for this year, but our costs are going to double. I mean, if our fuel cost will double if we're going to run every route twice, and our personnel costs will go up because our drivers will be working more hours. So I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. This is another place where we're going to have significant additional expense without a revenue source to cover it. So that's not a question, I guess.
Mr. Schneidmiller, do you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Fletcher's, you know, right on target. We will, I mean, I see if we go to a model where we have to make multiple trips per scheduled runs, you know, I would think that most, if not all of our bus drivers on a daily basis will go into an overtime situation. So salary costs, benefit costs will definitely go up. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, I mean, fuel, as you mentioned, Mr. Fletcher, that obviously would potentially, I don't know that it would double, but it would be at least 150% usage, we think, in what it would normally be. And so those are certainly concerns.
So just one clarification. Remind me of the strategy you got to 50% attendance. You're currently serving 44% of the population, correct?
Yes,
so
sir.
The 50% number you got to how?
So 50% is just modeling, you know, of every rider that's assigned to a run, we're assuming that 50% of them would go to school on any given day.
So 50% of the 70,000.
Yes, sir. So we would be transporting 35.
All right. So this is assuming an A-B day schedule?
– However that works out, yes. I mean, it would be a 50% riders.
Yeah. I think that's unworkable for parents. You can't go to work every other day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Johnson-Hostler has two questions, Mr. Schneidmiller. Her first question is, how will buses get cleaned between routes? And then her second question is, whatever protocols we establish, how will we ensure that those protocols are being met by our contractors?
So what we are thinking right now, and we'll have to really hone in on the guidelines once we figure out what model we'll be operating under. But our plan right now would be to clean the touch, high-use touch areas on each bus in between loading students for each run. And then there would be a thorough cleaning before the afternoon run, naturally at the end of the day, so that they're clean for the next morning. And then after the morning runs, for the afternoon runs, we would do a more thorough cleaning. This could be potentially an added cost, or it's either going to be bus driver hours, additional hours, or it's going to be on a contract basis. So there will be additional costs for those cleanings. And I see us mirroring the same thing with our contract vehicles, that we would require our vendors to do that same type of cleaning. And that is above and beyond, what our expectations are with the current language in the contract. So I would expect there to be additional costs around that also.
Mr. Snodmiller, give us a sense of what you might call a high touch area. Is that the rails when the student gets on the bus? Is that the top of feet?
Exactly.
Is that every window who for whatever kid that might put their face against the glass? What do you consider to be a high touch area on the bus?
Yeah, so exactly what you just said, Mr. Sutton. It would be the hand railing, helping students get on and off the bus. We know kids are going to touch the tops of seats as they progress to the back of the bus, and the windows are something that we could, and the sides of the down below the windows, the sides of the bus there, where students may touch quite frequently as they're riding. So I see those three things as being the major touch points.
Okay. And then the second part of her second question, how will you ensure that protocols, cleaning protocols and others are met by our contractors?
We would need to incorporate additional inspections. We do bring their vehicles in for inspections periodically based on our contract language. I think we would have to enhance that language and requirement, and we would need to find staff to do those inspections. And so same thing with the yellow buses. We would expect for our leadership to get out there and look at buses and make certain that things are happening the way they should.
And Ms. Johnson also wants to know, would this involve a contract? It sounds like a contract amendment. Would this involve a contract amendment? And if so, have these conversations already begun with these contractors? Or have any conversations already begun?
I think it could potentially require a contract amendment. And I think our vendors would probably prefer that. And we have been in touch and talked with our vendors, but not to the extent of what our models are looking at this time, more around the return of their drivers and what do they think that's going to look like. So once we kind of hone in on a model, I think we can get to work on all of that.
Okay, then I would imagine she would be suggesting that we might go ahead and begin some of these initial conversations then, to give them sort of a heads up this might be coming.
Yes, sir.
I certainly agree, Mr. Sutton.
Okay, didn't want to put words in your mouth, but I kind of figured. I don't see any. Ms. Mahaffey, I see your hand. Do you have another additional questions?
No, that is me just forgetting to lower my hand from earlier. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Martin.
Yeah, I just put a question in the chat earlier, but want to make sure we're thinking about the magnet versus base issues, because I can anticipate that it'd be much harder to do a double magnet route than it would a double base route. And it will not surprise me. We already see this happening some, where people say, I just can't do the magnet because of the transportation issues. So it won't surprise me that we would even see more people saying, I got to go back to base. So just want us to make sure we're keeping the magnet versus base ideas in our thinking.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sutton, are we good?
I think we're good. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I don't see any more hands at this.
Mr. Sutton, I did,
I'm sorry, Mr. Hagerty. I see your hand. Yeah.
that's quite all right. This is just a very quick follow-up to the question that I had in chat about the screenings. And Mr. Steinmiller, I appreciate your answer. Reading about the parent attestation that we could use instead of screening at bus sites, you know, I think that you'll get a lot of feedback from parents that if we use that model, and I mean, realistically, I think we may have to use that model. If we're putting kids on buses on the honor system that no, the kid is not real, doesn't have a fever, no, the kid does not feel bad, any of those other potential systems or potential exposure, and other parents are aware of that, I think that might also drive how many kids are on the bus from other parents. Parents that might be willing to do this, but they're not willing to put their children on a bus if there's the risk that other parents may not be as strict in following those guidelines. I don't know what the solution is, but I just know from as some of these guidelines have been published and parents have looked at them and reached out to us in conversation, you know, there's a lot of parent doubt about the how honest some other parents might be in attesting that their kids are healthy. And so if we do use that model, I think it might drive it might drive ridership down. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hagerty. Dr. Gardner, I think we're safe to continue.
So thank you. This is just one example of why we wanted to show you transportation and facilities, because we know we have to play out these different scenarios because it influences the plausibility and the feasibility of any options that we consider with regard to instructional learning models. We've got to know all the factors that are presenting the runway, and we wanted you to know the impact of the health guidelines on our ridership of our buses and what we're having to consider for routes. Similarly, we wanted to share with you how the classroom spaces are going to work. So I know that we are nearing our end of time. And so, Mr. Sutton, I need to ask you in respect of our time, we do want to share with you the protocol. We want to get additional input from the board. We know that a lot of questions and a lot of factors you've already identified today are going to weigh into our decisions, but we want to also make sure that we gather as much as we can from you. So, Mr. Sutton, if you think we need to stick to the time, I'm going to possibly propose that we might delay Elizabeth's presentation about occupancy until tomorrow and share with you what we'd like for the board members to do in relationship to the protocol before we might could come back tomorrow in our work session. But I want to make sure that would work with you with regard to time without extending it too far. Can you give us another 10 minutes or so maybe to go through that protocol? And then we'll delay on the facilities part?
I think that will be fine and more than appropriate.
Okay. So Elizabeth, we're going to wait and feed you in with regard to the square footage of classrooms and how the classrooms can be configured. Board members, if you remember, one of the streams of work that we identified in our last time was that we know that we have to look at occupancy in our buildings at any given time with regard to the health guidelines and how that might cause us to reconfigure our classroom spaces as well as some of the common areas. The slides that are in the deck that Elizabeth Sharp has prepared for you show you at the elementary, middle, and high where we are good with the number of classrooms if we put X number of students in a class, and where we would need additional classrooms to figure that out by either reconfiguring some of our cafeteria areas, our gymnasium areas, our media and library areas, etc. You could look at that data and preview that in advance of Elizabeth sharing it with you. She's also included some diagrams of how principals can reconfigure the spaces and use existing furniture as barriers and kind of guides for the health protocols and social distancing. We'll have her come back tomorrow and touch upon that a little bit in our work session, but these diagrams are going to be shared with principals as they reconfigure their classrooms. And we're also going to talk with you about how we're going to give them an occupancy spreadsheet that they can calculate very quickly how their numbers may play, depending however we go with our instructional design models. But again, I can't emphasize enough how these different factors interplay and kind of impact the feasibility of whatever we might do with regard to our scheduling piece. We know we want to get more input from you in addition to all the wonderful thoughts you've already shared with us today. And we were going to walk you through this protocol, but I think in adapting, we can still get the input from you if you're willing to just spend a little bit of time individually outside of this work session today. I'm going to have Beth Hodge walk you through this protocol. There's some key questions that we want to tap upon in this protocol. If any of you are familiar with the PEST protocol, it speaks to different elements of work toward decision making. And there are 4 broad questions that we're going to have you identify factors that we need to consider as a district, as well as consider at schools and the central services level as we move toward making the decision. And that is political. What policies would we need to change to accommodate some of this work? And will we need to work differently with our other elected bodies? Economic. What financial factors, which many of you already identified today, as related to our schools, families, employees, should we consider? This is not only about the funding for our operations, but other financial factors that may play into the mental wellness and health and safety of our students. Social. How does operating our schools under current health guidelines affect students, families, and employees? What factors should we consider with this as we think about the scheduling and the support we provide our school community? And then technological, we may immediately jump there in our thoughts that this purely relates to technology, but that is not the case. It can include it, but it's not all encompassing. It's what opportunities exist for innovative thinking and the redesign of schooling. As we've said many times, yes, there are mechanics and the logistics that we've got to address and reopening and returning after having been away since March. But we also, as best we can, how do we look at this as an opportunity and leverage for us very much in kind of like the direction we were going pre-March when school was closed. I'm going to have Beth walk you through the protocol where you can provide some factors related to any one of these categories. We'd like to hear your thoughts about all. We'll go through a prioritization process so that when we come back to you, we can have the energy is around the factors, and that will continue to shape our decision-making process. Beth?
Thank you, Lloyd. We invite you to join us at the link inside of your slide deck. It's here, and Lloyd, if you're able to cut and paste that into the chat, or if one of our folks would be able to, that might be helpful for our board members as well.
Marlo, could I ask you to do that, please?
When you get to this particular link, you're going to have to enter your email address in order to be able to return to this page tomorrow. You're going to see a page that says welcome with our objective, and then you'll be taken to a multicolored table, and we're going to begin with the brainstorm button. I'm going to take you there in just a moment, but I wanted you to see what the process would be when you arrive at that page. So if you could click on the link in your slide deck, and I'm going to go there myself, you'll see a page similar to this, but it'll ask you to put in your information. And then you'll see a page that looks like this. I can see Miss Cash is here, Miss Scott is here. Give you just a second because I don't want to move on through to the instructions too quickly. And I know that there are quite a few people on this call. This board is limited to 50 participants. So I'd like to make sure that our board members have the opportunity to get in.
Beth, I missed the entry point.
It is, if you are in the slide deck, oh, it's also now in the chat box, Mr. Fletcher. The join.groupmap.com. If you'll click on that. And staff, if we could limit this to our board members, that would be great. You can see Ms. Kushner's in here. All right.
A question I have, is this a public document? I mean, it's obviously public, the public can look at it, but does the public weigh into this, or is this just, board members input?
Right now, this is just board members. You're certainly welcome to add any comments that you have or thoughts that you have from the public. But yes, this is for the board. This was designed for you all.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Is anybody unable, or any of our board members unable to get in? Okay, then let me take just a moment to walk you through what it is we need for you to do. So you will see the 4 categories that Dr. Gardner already mentioned to you: political, economic, social, and technological. There are questions that can help prompt your thinking as to what each of these particular categories is seeking. So for political, what policies will we need to change? Will we need to work differently, etc.? And each one of the different categories has those questions for you. Now, thank you to whoever put in one for economic already, because what happens, you can see, is that when somebody, once you enter a comment, you no longer see the prompt, but if you click on the word, you get the prompt again, so that you will know what the questions are that will help you to answer this particular box. So what we'd like for you to do, we were going to take some time to begin this together today, but what we would like for you to do is consider the things that you've heard today, the things that you've read, the things that you've heard from your communities, and put in the things that we need to consider. What are the factors that we need to be considering as we do this work? And if you all will work on that this evening, and tomorrow we'll give you another chance to just add some additional thoughts. Then we'll give you some time to talk to each other about the kinds of things that you've put in here. And we will spend some time rating based upon priority and based upon impact, because they are not the same in all cases. And so we want to hear and see what your thoughts are with regards to priority and impact of these factors as we are planning for our reopening. So if each of you would take just a moment and enter a thought, I just want to make sure that you can do this. Just enter one thought into one of the categories. Then I'll turn it back over to Dr. Gardner and we can check out for the day. You will not see each other's thoughts quite yet. Okay, great. I see some folks entering. And if you click on the thoughts, just so you know, you can see who added a thought, and you can even provide a comment. If you're curious or need to know more, you're welcome to explore that as well tonight. Is anybody having any difficulty as you get in? All right, perfect. Board members, does anybody need any additional instruction about what to do for this particular portion?
So I guess my question is, I see where we can input comments. You said something about prioritization.
Yep, you don't do that tonight. We're going to do that. All I want you to do tonight is enter your thoughts here in the boxes, and you are certainly welcome to read each other's comments, read each other's thoughts, and then you can respond to each other if you want to. Like right here, I could type a note to Ms. Kushner about this particular comment. Maybe I have a question for her. So you can do that, and that's where I want you to stop tonight. I don't want you to move past the brainstorming and potentially making comments for each other, because we don't want to start rating until we've had the chance to make sure we're clear with each other about what we mean. And then, Dr. Gardner and I will probably do some categorizing tomorrow before we come back to the meeting with you all. and then we'll be able to move forward. I wanted to make sure I don't see anybody having written anything in the technological, and it may just because you haven't gotten there yet. Oh, perfect. But we did, this is really where we get to think out of the box and consider different ways of thinking about what school could look like, and what opportunities might exist for innovative thinking and the redesign of schooling. So we want you to make sure to spend some time there. So thank you for getting some comments there as well. All right, any other comments or questions about what I want you to do for this evening? Okay.
Mr.
Yes.
Blumberg has his hand raised.
Oh, yes, sir.
So I would just comment when we're done with this. I did have wanted to circle back to an earlier comment from the board about what options does the school system have in terms of decision making at this time. So I'll wait until the board's done with this piece.
Got it. Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Gardner?
Thank you, Beth. This is really going to work out well because it will give you the time that you need individually and independently to reflect upon this. And this is the exact type of information we need from you as a board with regard to factors that go into our decision making around the many facets that have to be addressed with regard to school reopening. Like you have expressed, we too feel this sense of urgency. We feel pressed to move forward with a lot of the work, but we also have to be fair and responsible to our students and our teachers that we're making the best decisions possible, given all the factors and input that they can share with us from all of our stakeholder groups. Because we can't underestimate how one decision impacts another, and we need to make sure that we are looking at things that are plausible and feasible given within that context. Tomorrow, when we come back together, in part of the work session tomorrow, we will look at this very information that you are key entering now. We will also pick up with Elizabeth, and we may have one more element of information that we are prepared to share with you as far as the decision points that are being considered in light of all the different factors. But we will add that as we can tomorrow. I can't thank you enough for your engagement today and all the wonderful information that you've given us. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you. I do want to take a moment of privilege to thank the core team for all the work that they are doing behind the scenes. They are working night and day and to try to put the pieces together, identify our options, and answer all the questions that we have before us. And branching off that core team, we have multiple work groups. So we have hundreds of people involved in this, literally, representing all voices across the district, both at central services, our school base, and even communities. So thank you for that. And Jonathan, I actually will let you and Superintendent Moore close out with any comments. And then Mr. Sutton, I will be finished. Thank you.
And I'll certainly let Kathy close. So if I could interject at this point and then go from there. So I've been board attorney working for the school system for over 30 years. And this is the greatest human and legal challenge that I've ever seen the district experience. As always, Wake County Schools will rise to this challenge. The board members' feedback was amazing today, and the staff rollout was excellent. Circling back to an original question that came up was, what decision making can be done at this time? What is the sort of the authority of the school system versus the state, and so on and so forth? And obviously, the state's put out 3 main plans, A, B, and C, that's based on sort of the allowable use of the facilities, including buses. And under A, it's can go up to 100% use of the schools and the buses, and with B it's 50%, and then C it's pure remote learning. But within A, B, and C, there's a great number of options and recommendations that the district has to have, and basically the district needs to come up with a plan for A, what are we going to do if it's up to 100%, B 50%, and C remote learning. So that's a tremendous amount of work at a sort of high legal level that needs to be done. And then the governor will be in a position then he said, to make a decision on whether it's A, B, or C by July 1st. So at a sort of a high level, wanted to just make that point. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan and Lloyd and Beth for your facilitation today, and Bob who presented, and Elizabeth who was waiting, and we'll continue tomorrow. As I just wanted to sort of riff off a little bit of what Jonathan was saying. The district needs to prepare Plan A, B, and C. And so what we need to do is put enough structure behind each of those plans, knowing, of course, that there are many factors that can change those recommendations with Plan A or B even. But to go ahead and put some structures behind what would Plan A look like in Wake County? What would Plan B look like in Wake County? And how would we even implement Plan C? And then all of those need to come to the board for review and I think approval in order to move forward. And so I don't know if that's required or not, but I think we need to think about that. So, because I think it's important that we're all on the same page and have that understanding and can promote and talk about how those decisions have been made. So that's the work that's before us. And that's why I mentioned earlier that I anticipate we'll have another session prior to even perhaps the end of this month. And then the next session that we know for sure is July 14th, which is pretty close to August 3rd. So we've got a lot of work still before us in the next 2 to 4 weeks in order to make sure that we've got everything ready to go. Thank you for your time, and I know we'll continue this tomorrow.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everyone. And I don't see any final thoughts or questions. So with that, it's 20 minutes after 1. So we will adjourn our meeting for today and look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow for our work session and board meeting. Thank you so much for your time today.
Take care, everybody.
You.
Mr. Chairman.
You take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.